Well, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to this panel session of the CU conference. It's a pleasure and an honor to introduce the chairperson for this session, Dean for Research Development and Graduate Programs at UFPR. He holds a PhD in Climate and Urban Planning from University of São Paulo, and was a postdoc fellow on epistemology of geography, urban environment at Sorbonne University. He has also a postdoc fellow at Universidade de Chile. He is a full professor at UFPR and visiting professor at State University of Rio de Janeiro, having been guest professor at Université de Sorbonne and Université de Haute-Bretagne, France, and guest researcher at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, England. He has published 16 books, 100 articles abroad and in Brazil, and has supervised over 100 master's theses, doctoral theses, and postdoctoral internships. His main areas of expertise are urban climate, urban social and environmental issues, health, geography, and epistemology of geography. Please welcome the chairperson for this session, Professor Francisco de Assis Mendonça.
Thank you very much, Marja, for this introduction to opening this section. It's a pleasure to me and to our university to receive 3 colleagues from United States, from Chile, and from Brazil to talk with us this afternoon about cities in the speech of sustainable and communities, development, sustainable development and communities. As the 3 sections in this international or global conference, it's a pleasure to receive you all, notably our guests, 3 guests this afternoon, and of course, everybody it's working that are working today with us. Our organization, our proposition to work at this afternoon, this round table, concerned around 30 minutes for each one. And we think begin with Mr. Hugo Romero, our colleague from University of Chile, and I will introduce him to his talk. And after him, we will hear Mr. Matthew Slaats from Virginia University. And in third position, we will hear our colleague Eneida Almeida, a colleague from Brazil, from São Paulo. The 3 colleagues will talk about this great subject, ODS 11, concerning sustainable cities and communities. So I will introduce you Mr. Or Professor Hugo Romero, as a very, very short curriculum from him. Mr. Romero is an associate professor at the Department of Geography at the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism at the University of Chile since 1982. He's the winner of the Latin American Geography Prize Milton Santos in 2019, and the National Geography Prize of Chile in 2013. He conducts research in collaboration with colleagues and institutions in several countries in Latin America, Europe, North America, and Asia. His research is in the areas of environmental geography, critical physical geography, urban planning and climatology, and environment. Hugo Romero is a very special friend of us in many universities in Brazil, and to me it's a very, very pleasure to receive him to talk to us now. Hugo, welcome again between us. The speech is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, my dear friend, Professor Mendonça. Well, I would like to start my presentation with 3 congratulations, no? The first one is for myself, because I am now titular professor in the university. I am no more associate professor, no? But of course I have to correct my CV, no?
Yes, sorry.
And the second congratulations is because Professor Mendoza, you know, has been appointed or elected like vice president of the Association of Authorities, University Authorities in Brazil, no? And I think that is a very important reconnaissance to him. And I congratulate him. And of course, I think that all the Latin America, we are hoping that you can do a very good work in favor of the public universities in Latin America. No? And the self-congratulation, of course, is to the organizers, no? Because it is a very important moment to discuss a little bit, to talk a little bit about the situation, the present situation, and the future prospects for our cities in Latin America. No? And then if you allow me, I would like to share with you some sort of slides, no? To illustrate my presentation. No? I always, this is a doubt, can you see the image? No?
Yes, it's okay. We're seeing your presentation. With a very interesting image concerning Santiago in the winter and summer, I suppose.
Yeah, probably.
And of course,
you have already recognized this.
Of course, in the third one under the dust.
Because you have lived here in Santiago, Professor Mendoza has been our visiting professor for some time. And then he recognized that I live in Santiago, we live in Santiago. And of course, I have selected this city because I know a little bit more about it, but because also I believe that is a good representation of the environmental issues and problems in Latin American cities in general. Like you can see here, this city, like many other cities in the Andean part of South America, and also in Mexico, no, they are located in the middle of watershed or river basins, no, which has a lot of complication from the environmental point of view, no. And this is a view in spring season, no, and this is a view like Professor Mendoza was talking in winter. At least how was winter until probably 10 years ago, no. The last years, unfortunately, it has not been present no more in our mountains, and it is another very important concern because in Santiago, we have only 20 days of rainfall in a year. So we depend completely from the glaciers as snow falls in the mountains. No? And then if we don't have, no, because the drought we are living now, of course, we are in a very serious problem in terms of water availability for the future. However, no, this beautiful vision, where probably you don't know, you are talking about the Alps, no, the Rocky Mountains, or the Andes, no, in this image, change completely when the landscape is occupied by the air pollution. Air pollution is the main environmental issue in Santiago de Chile, and in many other Chilean cities, but only in a lot of Latin American cities. Of course, you have the problem in Sao Paulo, for instance, but you can imagine the situation in La Paz, in Arequipa, in Bogotá, no, in Mexico City, of course, no, and also in Santiago, is probably one of the most important environmental issues or problem we have. And of course, it has a very important influence on the ecosystem and society health, no? And I can tell you that we estimate in near 3,500 people which are killed every year because air pollution, no? So air pollution is one of our main issues in many Latin American cities, and of course it is always increasing as a consequence of the increment in the sources. No? To talk about Latin American cities is always a difficult thing because, of course, our continent, no, and particularly if we are Mexico, Central America, no, we have a quite different series and types of cities in the northern and southern part of our continent. Of course, we have tropical cities, we have subtropical cities, we have temperate cities, no, and you can imagine that the difference between Rio de Janeiro, no, or probably Bogota or other Mexican cities, no, with Punta Arenas or Ushuaia, no, in the Terra del Fuego, no, in the southernmost part of the continent are quite different. And at the same time, the climatic and environmental conditions, sorry, in the Pacific coast, no, mainly under the influence of the sub-Antarctic and cold sea currents, is quite different to the situation in the Atlantic Ocean, no, the oceanic oceans located along the Atlantic coast, mainly, no, affected by tropical oceans. So, to select, if I select Santiago, no, by one example or case study, the first thing I must say that it is, as I mentioned, located in a closed basin, and it means that we have to live together with the mountain, no, and we are not a mountainous society, no. For historical reasons, for cultural reasons, we are people living in the flat area, no, in the plain, and we don't realize, no, how is the relationship with the mountain, the highlands and lowlands interactions. And of course, you can understand that air floods, for instance, no, affecting completely the climate in our city, particularly in those places which are near the mountain. But of course, other floods are quite important from the mountains. Water, of course, we depend completely from water accumulated in the mountains, but also biodiversity, no, is traveling along these contacts, no, and creating particular conditions in our city, in all the Andean cities, but it doesn't mean necessarily that we understand this set of interactions. One important result of this, of course, is that our cities are mainly located under inversion layers, that you can see here in this lower figure. Because, no, our situation in terms of latitude, we are permanently under an subsidence inversion layer. And in fall season and winter season, this inversion is together with the other surface radiation inversion, closing the atmosphere of the city completely and creating the condition favorable for the air pollution. What is the only solution we have? The only solution is, of course, to reduce systematically emissions. And the first question is that if we understand our geographical situation in a closed water river basin, do we realize that we have to control completely the emissions? And what is the main source of emission for air pollutants in Santiago, which, as I have mentioned, is the main environmental issue? Cars, transportation, no? It means that we create these conditions socially and culturally. For instance, allowing, like in all Latin American cities, the process of growing in all directions, permanently, constantly increasing each year, not only expanding the city, exploring the city, but also changing completely the rural environment to urban environment, and of course, affecting clearly the natural remnants of vegetation, water bodies, rivers, valleys, etc. We are permanently growing our cities, the size of our city. And you can see here in this model that compare the situation in the colonial time in the left figure, and then at the beginning of 20th century, at the end of 20th century, and probably today. You see, it's not only the increment in the size, and the distances between different parts of the cities requiring, of course, transportation, but always a very important social segregation and differentiation. And immediately you can see that there is in all Latin American cities and areas where the rich people is living and the rest of the city for middle class and lower class people. This is probably the most important feature of Latin American cities. And of course, as a consequence of this sprawl, you see the changes in the natural landscapes around the city. It was land covered in 1994, and it was in 2014. Most, for instance, if you see here in these parts, the foothill where we have exactly the interaction between the mountain and the flat area. You see this vegetation along the streams, the flouts between the mountain and the plain. So very, very important, controlling flooding, controlling biodiversity. And you see, practically in 20 years, most of this natural formation have been destroyed, have been fragmented, of course, reducing completely environmental services that are there so important for our city. It is interesting that during the discussions that we are observing in terms of urban issues, also we appreciate some sort of hybridization of the concepts which are becoming much and more important. For instance, here, this group of authors, scholars, are talking about socio-environmental issues. But at the same time, you can see in many, many papers today the use of socio-ecological, or socio-climatical, or the hydrosocial cycle. So we are doing everywhere, I think, a big effort in terms of in geographical terms. I am geographer, to put together, perhaps in a more relevant way, physical geography with human and social geography. And then there is a new number of concepts trying to understand this hybridization from the epistemological, methodological, and of course, application of the scientific knowledge to the cities. You have here a series of authors talking about, for instance, the framework of human ecosystem, the city and like a human ecosystem. The problem of resilience, which is of course very relevant, to adapt our cities to the natural and socio-cultural disturbances, and talking about integrated assessment of ecosystem service, vulnerability, coupled human and natural system, socio-ecological system, that you can see that there is this new emergences of concept everywhere to try to understand the city and their environmental issues, not only like a physical issue, but mainly like a social issue. And this is my city, the same city that you were observing, the mountain, the snow, beautiful landscape. It is October 2019. The population of the city moved to the streets to protest against the social, economical, fragmentation, segregation, exclusion producing a big, big social revolt that we have never seen before in Chile. And you see, several theaters, shopping areas, no homes, buses, metro station, metro cars were burned, that you can see here. The people was complaining against the social, economic, and political order in our cities. Also the rural areas, but mainly in our cities. Look, 1 million people demonstrating in the center of Santiago in October 2 years ago to complain against the system, but mainly to push for reforms, political reforms, social reforms. But the situation is not concentrated to Chile or to Santiago. Of course, it occurs also in all the rest of the Chilean urban system, but it doesn't differ much more from the situation we have observed in Quito 1 year ago, in Lima, in Peru, a few months ago, and everywhere probably. So it's very clear that our cities are not responding adequately to the social demands and political demands. And the only answer until now has been repression. You see, the police controlling the situation, producing important human rights violations. No? And this lady crying, no? In the middle of the light Ramon bombs, no? You see, no? How is the fear around her? And what she's crying? No? No more abuse. No? So this is a general explosive situation that we are living in our urban environment in Latin America. And we are not able to introduce social justice in our cities. This explosion can occur in any moment. And when we are talking about justice, we are talking about distributive justice. I mean, the distribution of cost of benefit in a fair way between the social groups. Procedural justice, which means that there are institutional law and organizations to take care, in this case, of the effect of climatic change in the cities. And also recognitional justice, that it means that we have to put the most important investment in the poor people in our cities to produce a sort of justice. And this justice should be represented in a just distribution of green and blue infrastructure in the city, in the adaptive land uses, in this case to climatic change, or environmental challenges, but also in the urban design. And you see, we have to create a just climate change adaptation. And we are not doing this. No? And on the other hand, we have to aspire, we have to keep the desire to move from the present and sustainable development to a future high sustainability degree. But you know, it's a difficult path, and it's surrounded by this channel of resilience, capacity of the system to be adapted to disturbances, natural and social political disturbances. If we are not able to do it, then we have to reduce our sustainability. And probably after the pandemic, we're here in this part of the figure. is these ecological or socio-ecological principles are really understood in the urban planning and management system in Latin America? It means that we have harmony with nature, as you can see here. We have latency, we are protecting natural spaces in our cities. Our cities are polyvalent. No, it means that each piece of a space is used in a multifunctional way. So do we have enough heterogeneity and redundancy in our cities? Modularity is part of our urban design. And of course, connectivity. We realize about connectivity and the lack of redundancy we are having in our cities. At least in Chile, I must say, I don't know exactly how the situation in Brazil today, but these principles are not integrated in our urban ecosystem. We are not observing clearly this ecosystem like some addition of urban atmosphere, urban biosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere, and the built system. We don't have this systematic approach in our urban planning and development process. At the same time, we are not conscious about the ecological footprint that our city are causing in terms of demand of water, food, fuel, power, and how everything is coming to the city, transforming, like for instance, producing greenhouse gases, but at the same time, producing enormous amount of solid water, solid waste, degraded water, etc. No, we don't have this idea. But however, coming back to the main point I would like to emphasize, this is the distribution of the population in Santiago according to the income, economic income. In blue, the richer part of the city. In yellow, the poor and middle class part of the city, and in gray, some middle classes. It was in 2012, it was in 2016, and of course it is today. At least two different cities in one city, at least two. We have many more. A map, in the left map, you see the distribution of the social groups in black colors, the rich part of the city, and in gray, the rest. The value of propriety in the city, I can tell you that the difference in price of one home in this rich part in comparison with the poor part could be at least 25 times. And much more. Of course, this price of the houses are represented climate, vegetation, environment, social and physical environment, that it is commodified and is a marketable good like any other. And as a consequence, the city is divided in different neighbors, and each of these neighbors are representing some social group. And please remember some of the names, Vitacura and Las Condes in this rich part of the city, or perhaps Lampa, Quilicura, or Renca in the poorest part of the city. They are quite important in the understanding of our city. Look, the aerial vision of the vegetation. In red, lack of vegetation. In green, of course, the presence of vegetation. Observe the distribution of air pollution in the city. Two cities. The clean city in the richer parts, the dirty city, of course, in the poorer part. It is a day of maximum air pollution in the city. And you see the difference in concentration of particulate matter between these rich parts and the poorer part could be. You see 160 micrometers, and to 300, at least doubly, the pollution in the poorer part of the city in comparison with the richer part. And look at the temperature in the city. In blue, the Coral Islands in red, the heat islands. And of course, between the cold areas and the warmer area is the prices and circulation, air circulation, moving the pollution from the richest part to the poorer parts. And what is the main cause for the pollution? I mentioned cars. Look, this is a cancer of the Latin American city. The increments of cars without any control. In this year in Chile, no, they have sold much more cars than never before as a consequence of the pandemic. Look at the health situation. The people living, in this case, women, no, living in the east part of the or the rich part of the city and the poor part here, no, difference in expectancy life years. How is possible that the women living in this part has, no, you see, practically, no, 12 years less of life expectancy because she lives here. No? What does it mean in reality? But of course, we have observed, no? I am just going to pass briefly this part, no? But we have observed in the satellite images for the last 20 years, no? For night and daytime, how the heat island are moving and behaving, no? In this city. No? And of course, it's a very dynamic situation. But the most important point I would like to say that in summer, no, or during the night and day, no, always the richest part has moderate temperatures, adequate ventilation, enough humidity, no, and on the contrary, the poor part of the city accumulate heat islands and in winter, which is very dangerous for the health of the population, cold islands. No? And you see the relationship between, no, spatial correlation between surface heat island and socioeconomic status. And remember some of the names I mentioned, no? Vitacura, the richest community in the city. At the same time, the area of the city with no heat islands, no? And of course, the poorer part, no, Cerro Navia, Renca, I mentioned, no, in the other extreme, accumulating the heat, no? And then it is during day, during night, no? The correlation is inverted. No? It means that in Providencia, in the richest part of the city, they have warmer climate than the poor part of the city. And of course, it's very important in terms of health in some subtropical city and mountain city like Chile, like Santiago. Correlation between vegetation and social situation, no? Social condition of the communes or neighbors in Santiago. Yes, of course, the poor part of the city with the less, no, normalized vegetation indexes. Always the same. And this situation is historical, how it's constructed now. And you see, we are observing also the trends to try to explain that our cities are becoming yet not only heat islands or cold island, depending on the area of the city, but also the concentration of heat extreme point that you see here. Now, the cities are now a very complex mosaic of heat islands, of archipelago, or perhaps also isolated places. And you see, look, this representation of the heat waves in Santiago, completely different, depending on the area. And of course, the concentration of the, in this case, heat waves in the poorer part of the city. So our city are a complex mosaics of climatic, local climatic zones that you can see in the case of Santiago. And we have observed the same in our cities. It is then possible to compare two parts of the city, one representation of the middle lower class in Santiago in the left images, Estación Central neighborhood, you see an area of gentrification, no? During the last time were observed, no? No, the tall buildings of more than 30 floors, practically 100 meters of height, so for the middle class. And then the richest part of Vitacura, no, with planning, a lot of vegetation, water bodies, amenities, completely different. And the distance between these two parts of the city is only 10 kilometers. And then observe the geoforms, the urban forms, no, in the aerial view, no, in the upper part, no, the poorer part, no, the rich part in the lower figure, and then you see the forms, the vegetation, look, the urban vegetation, in the poorer part, practically nothing, no, in the richer part, an abundance of vegetation. And it's kind of factor, no, that of course is related with the, not only the observation of the sky, but all the climatic local effect of the canopy layer. No? And you see completely different. Here you can see the sky from everywhere. Here no, only the big avenue. And then in this case, temperatures. No, the poor part and the rich part. No? You can see the colors. No, of course the blue colors are the lower temperature. But what is the difference between the poorer part and the richest part at the same time? No, you see, could be 20 degrees of difference, no? And of course, you can imagine in terms of thermal comfortability, how the situation. And you immediately can recognize that there are some people suffering with the climate and some people enjoy the life. And in terms of ventilation, look at the ventilation, no? Of course, in the upper part, no, the ventilation, in the poorer part, you see the street is the only canyon for ventilation, no? And look, after each of these tall buildings, you have the cavities of ventilation that the British meteorologists call death zones, because of course, ventilation has disappeared, and as a consequence, the concentration of air pollution is very high, and of course, the effect on the health of the population. And compare, no, the poor part and the death zone with the richer part. Then, no, you see the microclimate, the urban canyons are completely different. The cavity zone, the death zone, in terms of ventilation in a city where the main problem is air pollution. No? Look the wind speed. How the wind speed is affected. In this case, the poor neighborhood and the rich neighborhood. You can imagine all this climate socially built, representing mainly lack of justice, has been very relevant the last time during the pandemic. Look at the distribution of the death in the Santiago during the pandemic, and look the relationship between, no, in this case, death rates, no, and of course, poverty. The richest part of the city, of course, the lower death rates. And in the other extreme, the poorest part of the city, no, with the higher figures of poverty accumulating at the same time the death. And observe the behavior of the pandemic at the fall season, the winter season, and the summer season. And then in the lower figure, you have, no, of course, in the fall season, they were concentrated in the richest part. And then, no, you move to the rest of the city, and they concentrate in the poorer part of the city because the distribution of the temperatures inside the city. In the core of the winter season, you see the temperatures around 1 degree, the surface temperature. And of course, you know perfectly that in subtropical cities, the temperature is a very important determinant of the disease. We have been trying to understand the role of urban climate and urban environment in the disease, but of course, fortunately for us, the Chile vaccination has progressed very much, and then we can repeat the same exercise in the last year where we were able to put together everything. To finish, 2 points I would like to say. First, my colleagues are working with drones now, trying to understand the microclimate features in Santiago, and then what they have observing is, like you can see here, difference of near 20 degrees between the green area and artificial grass in a football place, football place, no? And then, of course, the local climatic zones are increasing. But at the same time, we have doing during the last time, together with the chemical department in our university, measurement of particulate matter air pollution of different size, 10, 2.5, and less than 1 micrometer in a specific neighbor in the city. And what we have got is that a very important differentiation between one street of heavy traffic comparing another street with low traffic, no? And of course between green areas, between different density, between different orientation or exposure of the homes. So everything is different. And our children are also different. It was a research made some years ago, probably Professor Mendoza knows them also this figure. No? We went to a specific neighbor in Santiago, and we have worked out the environmental perception from the children. But these children are from different social groups. Here is the poorest children, no, the lower middle class, the middle class, no, the upper middle class, and the rich people, or children. And we asked them to represent their urban environment, and they did. No, this is the representation of the poorer children in this part of the city, the same neighborhood, no, but with different social groups inside. This is the representation of the poorer group. You see rubbish, no? You see gray, very few vegetation, cars and dog. But look the dog, the child put in this dog excrement, no? To demonstrate, no, the quality of this environment. No? And look the environment of the middle social housing people or children. Everything the same. And look the children living in the part of the neighborhood where the fences, no, the separation are the main vision, the main view that the children has. Differentiation, separation, and segregation. And of course, the children living in the tall buildings, looking always like a bird from the sky, no? But at the same time representing, no? How is the urban environment where they are living. And of course, finally, sorry, I think that the last one. Well, the last one, the last one was sorry, for some reason it is not here. No, here, no, it's not. Well, the last one was the richest children, and they put in the figure, of course, gardens, a lot of vegetation, flowers, suns, birds, a completely environment, a completely different environment. The question is, if it is the environment that we are creating for our children, we can be sure that in the next future, these children are going to be part of this among millions of people demonstrating in our streets against the social ecological environment that we have built for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hugo Romero. It was very, very interesting hearing you about, of course, the examples from concerning Santiago, but certainly that reality in Santiago is almost the same reality in all the Latin American cities. Unfortunately, many problems, but an important hope beside your presentation, because we must believe in youngs, must believe in children, and must build the future. So thank you very much. It was very, very interesting to hear you. I invite you to stay with us to hear also our two colleagues, and after that we'll talk and we'll debate. Of course, certainly we have important questions there. So the second one, the second person to talk with us, I invite Matthew Slaats. I'm knowing him now. I suppose him too, for myself. It was my colleague, Professor Mariano Macedo, that indicated him. And thank you, Slaats, to be with us. Welcome to the Federal University of Paraná in this global international conference concerning sustainable development goals. And we're talking, of course, as you know, about cities, communities in all the world, but of course, with accent in America, Latin America, and United States as you are. If you permit me, I will just introduce you with a very, very small curriculum. In fact, I found this, your presentation in a link in the website in an institution concerning religion, race, where you work, or you contribute from Virginia University. But Matthew Slaats is a PhD candidate in the University of Virginia School of Architecture's PhD program in the constructed environment. Maybe it's not actual, your CV, but you may completely, if you want, in your speech. As a part of his research, he is building a participatory action research initiative with community partners to study how grassroots social transformation is imagined and realized by Black communities in the Southern United States. Based on his work, the group is thinking about how these ideas around assemblies and solidarity economies might be implemented in Virginia. Previous to this, Matthews dedicated his career to supporting grassroots community-based decision-making by implementing creative placemaking projects and participatory budgeting initiatives. This included developing unique collaborations that magnified the immense knowledge that resides in every neighborhood. This has led to projects focusing on environmental sustainability, affordable housing, community development, and food justice that have been supported through a range of foundations and federal grants. So, Slaats, Matthew, welcome again. Each one has around 30 or 40 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I hope you can hear me. it's wonderful to be here, and it's an honor to be in a room with all so much knowledge in it. I'm still working towards finishing my PhD, but it's amazing to see. Even though we're working across different geographies, Professor Romero's work, I can map similar. We can map similar disparities in the U.S. The life expectancy is definitely one, and so there's a lot of connections that need to be made. So so thank you very much. So I'll show my presentation. I have some slides. Let me see if I can do that. Yeah, show that. Good. Hopefully everybody can see.
Yes, okay. Okay.
Great. So again, Matthew Slaats.
I think you can put in presentation because we have all your screen.
No, I'm nervous about the technology.
Yeah, so everybody else are knowing. We are knowing.
Is everybody?
It's okay. Now it's very good.
Okay,
continue, please.
Wonderful. So I've changed the title of this presentation a little bit based on conversations and thinking about this idea of translation, but a lot of the threads will be similar. Also thinking about sustainability in a little bit different way, and a little less kind of environmentally focused and more on the political and economic side of what sustainable communities really mean. And since I'm rooted here in Virginia, in Charlottesville, which some of you may know from the news over in 2017, which I'll mention, thinking about how do we move beyond some of the historical racial logics, these disparities that are impacting our communities. And so solidarity economies have been a different logic that we're kind of introducing and trying to see how that moves forward. But recognizing that a lot of those ideas are coming from South America, Latin America into the US in terms of projects around participatory budgeting, which I've been involved with both in the city scale and with organizing that on the national scale, but how that leads to more sustainable communities in our in the U.S. So I just want to say my thanks to Professor Macedo, Carol Maziviero, and Patricia Bazil, who will help make this possible. We'll be teaching a collective course with the Federal University of Paraná in the spring between our institutions on solidarity economies in urban Latin America. But I also want to thank my partners here, the Virginia Solidarity Economy Network, that's been an inspiration, and partners in trying to make all this work happen. So I want to start by, again, kind of hitting on this idea of translation. Again, much of the work that we're doing is inspired by work that's been taking place in Brazil, in Colombia, Chile, other places in South America, and thinking a lot about how that work is coming into the US, recognizing the different contexts. But this idea of translation is something I just want to hit on for just a little bit, and then I'll go into some of the projects that we've been working on. So translation's been on my mind as of late, and I remember back to my first experiences of being in a foreign country, worrying about getting lost or being unable to find my way, but then at the same time experiencing profound yet simple moments where perceived barriers are overcome, and the simple task of working together with people who I may not be able to verbally communicate with, but and yet we can use gestures and get points across, ultimately accomplishing complex tasks through improvisation and assessing different or accessing different resources. So in 2013, Susan Bassnett wrote her book, Translation, and she brings forward the complexity of these ideas when considering the dynamics of language and translation and their connection to signs and lived experiences. She says, not only are languages not the same, but the ways in which language are used are never the same. So the task of the translator is indeed a highly complex one, and for it requires negotiation of difference that is both linguistic and cultural. And so while she references a host of theorists and practitioners, she specifically notes Walter Benjamin's writing on translation, noting that translators must work like archaeologists, putting together fragments of a vessel in order to restore its original shape and assemble in ways as such ways to incorporate the mode of signification of the original. And so Bassnett then goes on to describe translation as the afterlife of a text, ensuring its existence in another time and place and saving the text from extinction. So let me come back to solidarity economies. So even though I just referenced this small snippet, much of what Bassnett is saying feels very true to my own experience as both someone that studies and practices solidarity economies. I firmly believe in not only doing the research, but actually trying to kind of build and develop these opportunities for realizing sustainable communities. So inspired by efforts that are global in scale, yet with a specific interest in all that has been developed in Latin America, I feel like a little bit of a translator. But what I am translating goes beyond language, science, and culture, but rooted in a contextual complexity of history, politics, and the constructed environment. In these efforts, I recognize both differences and similarities, which drives a desire to build connections that share experiences across the distances we find ourselves. Translation is a requirement of this work, but it's a translation that doesn't hold the desire to colonize knowledge, but build robust infrastructures of exchange. So this requires a significant amount of trust and a dedication to building a resilient relationship that develops solidarity. This, for me, is the responsibility of translation. So with that, I really just want to explore what I see as some similarities and differences, points of contention and connection that are emerging here in the US, in my context and elsewhere. And what to consider with others is, about the ideas of solidarity economy and how they're emerging theoretically and tangibly. And I'm doing so as I'm trying to assess how ideas and practices are moving, across these landscapes, which as I mentioned, we are very interested in kind of continuing to pursue through this partnership next spring with as a part of this class. So the first thing that has been coming to mind in terms of this idea of translation is this translating of presence. So having worked in, let me see, so translation. Having worked as a community organizer and activist for over 15 years, focusing on community-led decision-making and modes of participatory democracy, I'm deeply aware of the way that alternative and economic practices are both made present and hidden from us. One of the primary conversations that have been emergent in the work that both I and others are doing is the way that economic systems have been historically abstracted. And in doing so, they remove the agency of individuals to be actors in those systems. In interviews with communities of color in the US and research that we've been doing, there's a cemented belief that the economy is not built for them. If we look at statistics, much similar to what was presented earlier, of health, education, wealth, housing stability, and life expectancy, the reality of this belief becomes stark. There's a need to find ways to engage people about how the economy functions and the world that is created. So to do this, organizations like us and the Highlander Center, many others, are using models of popular and political education to allow people to see behind the curtain and explore how their local economies function through their own experiences. This then provides the foundation for communities to take action based on what they see and know, developing new modes of governance and investment that will be most impactful. And I reference Jessica Gordon-Nembart's book, which I have up on the screen, Collective Courage, which one of the things it argues for is that the importance of study groups that take the time to understand these contexts, learn about alternative economic models, and strategize ways to take action that were vital to the development of like Black worker cooperatives and Black sustainability in the early 20th century. Yet this takes time, it takes patience, and a commitment to slow change. Alternatively, I've experienced the way that narratives constrain and bind what can be possible in terms of economic opportunity. So my work in New York and in Virginia provide ideal examples of the ways that narratives work to mask and perpetuate the realities that our communities live in. So in the case of the work in New York, we saw a narrative that was one of decay that clouds the city. It focused on crime. That was a narrative that perpetuated a culture of mismanagement and disinvestment that not only hid the vibrancy of a primarily immigrant and Black community, but opened up opportunities for continued extraction through control of land and resources. Whereas in Charlottesville, there's a narrative of prosperity, right? Charlottesville as a town has been voted many times as one of the best places to live in the United States. But this hides a history of racial-driven disinvestment and disenfranchisement that flows overtly throughout all of the southern US and more covertly elsewhere. And it wasn't until the recent efforts to remove statues, symbols of a narrative of white supremacy, that the prosperity myth was unmasked. The discrepancy between Black and white, poor and rich, became real for a much broader group of people. And in this gap, a significant amount of organizing, activism, and questioning of who holds power comes forward. So since the World Social Forum gathered global movements together to state that another world is possible in the early 2000s, there's been a significant effort to map initiatives that can fall under the framework of solidarity economies in the United States. And I think this is in comparison to the significant work that's been done in the to document and link solidarity economy initiatives in South America through projects like one we referenced quite a bit is the Solidarius project, which has a database of initiatives. So in the US Solidarity Economy Network and the US Federation of Worker Cooperatives maintains maps that are focused on making the solidarity economy present at the national level. And you can see a little bit of a blurry image of that here. And while urban-based initiatives in New York, Chicago, and elsewhere document the development and experimentation of solidarity economy practice at a different scale. And what we have found in our research of these efforts, and while they make present solidarity economies, these maps present a very constrained timeline of activity, whether due to the lack of funding or in that they emerge from a singular project. They provide only a snapshot of a much broader history. So based on this, the work that we are doing in the community with the Virginia Solidarity Economy Network is taking a different approach, is weaving a much broader historical picture of solidarity economy practices, making sure that the historical Black and Indigenous practices serve as a foundation of the future of these efforts. And they maintain a direct relationship between past and present. And they're using the mapping process not so much as a way of locating these practices, but as a way of looking across the breadth of projects and institutions to build a dialogue about the value of solidarity economy as they manifest in the work. So this then serves as a means to realize solidarity economy initiatives, various initiatives across the state. Thinking a little bit more globally, we also recognize that divergent institutional, legal, and cultural structures that are manifest between solidarity economy efforts. Brazil has been always a reference point in this work. where the end of dictatorial regimes brought a significant response from the grassroots and the national level, allowing practices to grow, the creation of academic incubators and the federal institutionalization investment to support a collective movement. Those scholars have critiqued this approach as it tends to be a fragile structure that shifts as political powers continue to shift. And while federal offices could disappear as these powers change, new laws at the state level come into effect. So we see, even though there is a fragility in some of the structures, there is some resilience at the same time. And over years of grassroots organizing mixed with cultural interest in social welfare, you know, in Canada, we see a response to globalization and its impact on industrial economies. You know, Quebecois governments were convinced of the meaning of social solidarity economies as a means to rebuild communities. And this has led to significant investment in the sector and establishment of networks beyond the urban center. So they might start urban and then they kind of spread out into the rural spaces at the same time. So while in the US, we have to recognize that there will probably never be action by the state at the state or national level. Efforts reside at the local scale and build from histories of unionization and collective governance that radically differ from state to state. In the case of Virginia, where I live, we have laws, a right to work law that really constrains the opportunity for labor organizing, and the Dillon rule, which allows power to be held at the state level, requiring cities to limiting what cities can make possible to respond to moments of need. But while these can be seen as impediments, they're also means to push against and imagine alternatives. So they're not total barriers, but they're responsive mechanisms that we see as we move forward. So the other thing that has been conversation about translating is about this idea of crisis. So while Marxist scholars like David Harvey have long noted the tension inherent in capitalism, unsustainable rates of growth and environmental degradation have been the most discussed, is the continuous and compounding cycles of crisis that need further exploration and response. From a lack of affordable housing to a global pandemic, heat waves to flooding, there is a constant need to respond to the most pressing needs of our communities. Though I wonder what it means to be building a new world in the midst of constant trauma. In the vacuum of governmental and nonprofit response to the global pandemic, all of these are institutions that define our civic society and are meant to be this backstop in these moments. In the US, we saw resident-driven initiatives step in to create alternative support systems to provide vital resources and mutual aid, a term historically that has been associated with Black communities in the US. And there's been tension in the usage of that term without referencing the history of it. But they've sprouted out in many different places when COVID-19 came into the US. These groups took hold of technologies to quickly raise and disperse funds, provide food and supplies, develop pathways of communication to share vital information, much of which was just done voluntarily. And this was an expression of power and showed the strength of what could happen when communities collectively organize. Though, as the waves of infection have subsided, the most dire moments have passed, and the civic society has stepped back in to the frame, community efforts have begun to wane. Funding and the energy needed to maintain these efforts has dried up. And I would argue that what actually took place was a shift of informal networks and activities stepping into a public role, becoming present in new ways, though they've always been there. And now as they fade back into the background, there's a deep questioning of the meaning they had, the impact they made, and the realization of the function they play on a daily basis. I would ask if there is I would ask if this is the right foundation on which to build a solidarity economy. In 2017, Charlottesville became not keeping up with my slides, I'm sorry. Charlottesville became into the national and global news cycle based on marches and subsequent protests that were driven by a group of Nazi, alt-right, and white supremacists. And while many of these people were not from Charlottesville, they came here based on a community-initiated effort to remove several monuments, which have perpetuated a narrative of lost cause, which is a narrative that was constructed after the US Civil War to maintain superiority by white communities in the South. These efforts, these works of art became the focal point, and as a student of political economy and as a trained artist, I recognized their symbolic power in the community, but what I thought was missing was a deeper analysis of the political and economic systems that supported them. They're only really the tip of the iceberg, and we see continued efforts to rename streets, remove statues, address the easiest kind of aspects of those efforts in our society. But there isn't this deeper engagement with the economics and the impacts that has for the future. In the book Freedom Dreams, The Black Radical Imagination, Robin D.G. Kelley engages the dichotomy of a for versus against kind of mindset. In discussing social movements, he notes that the ease at which movements arise against an object, a policy, a person, but there's a lack of clear vision about where that might go. This is the history of ideas of contentious politics. And I've struggled with these positions myself, recognizing that I agree with the efforts to remove these symbols of harm in our community, but again, I do not hear a vision for an alternative world that is being created. In the 5 years that have passed, the activity and activism that grew out of those moments, again, is now kind of waning, and we're kind of returning back to status quo. So it's in these moments that have set the stage for the development and our efforts working around the solidarity economy movement here in Virginia. In 2010, with a group of 15 grassroots activists and organizers from around the state, we started to create this network. It was focused on educating ourselves and considering not only our local context, but thinking about how other initiatives from around the world can inspire the work here. Again, translation comes to be the forefront as we see the wealth of activity that is taking place, but also the ongoing work that is needed to manifest a new economic system at various levels of local, state, national, and global. And in this work, there's several other modes of translation that have been coming forward. The first is kind of this translating of ideology. In an article in the Nonprofit Quarterly in July 2020, scholars Emily Kawano and Julia Matai provided a basic primer on solidarity economies. They position solidarity economies, that's the top here, as a part of a post-capitalist system in relation to democratic socialism. While this article provides a foundation for thinking about solidarity economies, collectively, the Virginia Solidarity Economy brought questions forward about these connections, especially in the way that terms like socialism and capitalism have been used by conservative politicians to fight cultural battles that date back to the 1950s and continue to do so. From this, we concluded that these positions, while needing to be understood, are now at the forefront of what we want to engage in our communities. So with a focus on inclusivity, we are directly focusing on communities' affective response to the way that these economics impact their lives, and then build from there. So ideology then becomes emergent, theory becomes emergent, while experience is kind of forefronted. We're also translating shared values. Another focus is centered on the values that have been defined as the foundation of the solidarity economies, that being democracy, equity, solidarity, sustainability, and pluralism. And as a group, the Virginia Solidarity Economy recognizes these as important. And it's referred to the ways that global groups like RIPES, the Global Solidarity Economy Network, has worked diligently center these concepts as a framework for an alternative economic mode. Though our position is that they remain abstract. They're broad ideas which we can all rally around and kind of agree on, but how do we make them tangible and be accountable to them? And this has led to a series of lengthy conversations and workshops to consider how they are realized and query their meaning. As a part of our mapping process, we are asking groups from around the state working in parallel to these efforts about their perceptions to these values. And again, these groups typically express their agreement with them. But when we dig deeper, we realize that that agreement is a kind of an externalized understanding of these values, placing the values in the future. They're always moving towards them. But I would contest, if we think about writing from Rancière and Derrida, that their ideas of democracy to be, these values always just sit outside of the reality of the present context. So we see the work of doing that, of kind of bringing those values into the reality of our lives and recognizing them in a much deeper way. And then lastly, I want to sit with the complexity of this work. And again, I think, Professor Romero showed that very well in Chile. From the outset, the network has wanted to make tangible steps in our communities, but also thinking about how we need to consider an ecosystem that provides an environment for supporting these efforts long term. So one cannot kind of happen without the other. And we've had discrepancies in this because there's many organizers, activists, community groups that are doing the work on the ground. And when you try to step back and think conceptually about the complexity of what an ecosystem might look like, they're like, we're too busy. We're doing the work on the ground. We don't need to talk about this. So it's like, how do we find that bridge, that ability to make sure that the ecosystem that we're trying to imagine fits and supports the work that's going on the ground? So we have to be really cognizant of the context in which that we are working, which has led us to seek out organizations elsewhere to understand their practices, goals, and failures. Ultimately, we've been thinking about an ecosystem for solidarity economies that aligns political, legal, educational, financial, environmental, and the doing of that work. How do we hold that? How do we mentally and physically understand that happening? And so we're developing models for how that could happen. Again, based on everyday practices. We're looking and surveying what's going on, and then looking for spaces that we can invest and develop conversations that then are more emergent. But then recognizing that all of these things are always intertwined. And to overcome this, we're focusing on the solidarity that is needed to realize this ecosystem. If we understand that in many ways there's a wealth of solidarity economy practices taking place already without even this term kind of being recognized, let's start by trying to build the trust and the relationships that can then allow us to work together to realize this ecosystem, creating ecosystems that require constant translation between each other. So in conclusion, I want to come back to just sit with this idea of translation. I'm thinking back to Benjamin's metaphor of the translator as an archaeologist, which I see as being important in terms of solidarity, economy, development. But instead of trying to purely piece the innovative aspects of a new economic system together, it requires a recognition of the context and circumstances in which these efforts take place. Solidarity economies are not a model to be copied, which I really think is an impossibility, but more being more generative. We need to develop understanding. We need to develop the understanding of the affective responses which are emergent and the meanings they imbue. And we need to sit with that. And in doing so, we need to find the space to create narratives that express the reality of the struggles that we take place. And through thoughtful translation, then become an opportunity an opportunity and not a barrier for the worlds that we wish to create. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. It's very, very interesting to know after the Santiago, Chile experiences or examples, see in the United States, through your studies, your work in your group, some social conflicts that put the cities in very complicated challenge to find the new way of life, the new relationship between man and nature, of course, a new society. I think pandemic condition put us, every us against the wall to find ways. But of course, pandemic didn't put new pieces in our days. Pandemic just explained more or put more in our vision the problem that happened before, but that was never resolved before. So now I think we are, with technologies, of course, having the possibility to change and to put in contact the possibilities and try to find new ways to the future. Thank you again. Please stay with us. Please stay with us to the debate. I think we have interesting questions for the minute after this position of our dear Eneida Almeida that is here with us. Eneida, welcome also. Eneida, I will introduce you in the discussion just, of course, a very, very small CV. And Eneida, as I told you, you can speak in Portuguese. I will ask to Matthew have a little patience to wait, because I don't know if you speak Portuguese, maybe no. But as I'm telling before, this emission will be registered, and we will put a legend in English after. So you can follow the speech of Eneida after the registration. So Eneida Almeida is a PhD in history and the fundamentals of architecture and urbanism at the University of São Paulo in the Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism of Universidade de São Paulo. She's master in study in the restoration of monuments of Sapienza, University of Rome, professor and researcher at the undergraduate and graduate program in architecture and urbanism at University São Judas Tadeu, São Paulo. And finally, she's a researcher at the Urban Commons Network in Latin American, called QUAL. So, Eneida, seja muito bem-vinda aqui entre nós. Usei aproximadamente 30 minutos, sem nenhuma delimitação muito séria, para falar um pouco de sua experiência das cidades. Bem-vinda entre nós. Nós não estamos te ouvindo ainda, Eneida. Agora sim.
Ótimo, sim. Obrigada, professor Francisco. Sorry, Professor Mary Slaats, to speak in Portuguese. What make me feel today like a fish out of water, as we say in Portuguese. Excuse me. De início, eu gostaria de agradecer ao convite, em nome da rede de pesquisa QUAL, Comum Urbano na América Latina, em especial a professora Maria Carolina Maziveiro, professora da Universidade Federal do Paraná, que me indicou para representar o grupo de pesquisa QUAL. Eu gostaria ainda de esclarecer que essa minha fala foi construída coletivamente pelos integrantes do grupo como parte do nosso modus operandi e de nosso posicionamento contrário aos cercamentos, de modo geral, não só da propriedade, mas também da propriedade intelectual. Portanto, esse posicionamento, ele procura relacionar a essa discussão dos Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável, especialmente essas metas para tornar cidades de mais assentamentos humanos inclusivos, seguros, resilientes e sustentáveis, aos princípios e às práticas do comum. E, para isso, é necessário que apontemos algumas das principais contradições presentes nos modos de organização e planejamento das cidades, que estão, por sua vez, associados ao próprio modo de produção capitalista e à vigência das políticas neoliberais. Nesse sentido, eu vou apresentar aqui um encadeamento de temas que partem da noção de uma crise de processo civilizatório, relacionando esse contexto mais amplo com o que certos urbanistas chamam de crise urbana, para apontar uma busca por alternativas de desenvolvimento com base na concepção da economia solidária e articulada a ideia do comum e dos comuns urbanos, mais especificamente, né, associada, por fim, ao conceito do ecossocialismo. Então, é com esse encadeamento de temas que organizamos essa fala nesse encontro. Portanto, partindo dessa crise do processo civilizatório, nos remetemos a autores como Stengers e Latour, que veem os crescentes fenômenos naturais extremos como sinais da intrusão de Gaia, né? Ou seja, uma resposta do planeta ao descuido humano com seus outros habitantes, seus recursos e sua integridade física. A hipótese de Gaia, segundo Latour, trata da relação heterotrófica entre os seres terrestres. Quando os autores Stengers e Latour se referem à intrusão de Gaia, eles estão retratando um único perdedor nessa disputa, que é a própria humanidade, né? Essa visão, então, aponta para crises, para uma crítica à noção de progresso e desenvolvimento, como contradições próprias do capitalismo, que é um modelo de produção baseado no esgotamento dos recursos naturais, em processo de exploração e dominação. Então, muitos autores, entre os quais Sousa Santos, é enfático, né, ao afirmar que a única chance de continuarmos existindo como sociedade será a partir da busca por alternativas ao sistema capitalista. Justamente pelo fato de o capitalismo ser sustentado por uma noção extrativista de mundo, não é possível existir um capitalismo ecológico ou menos poluidor. Enquanto houver capitalismo, afirma Sousa Santos, haverá desigualdade, haverá racismo e patriarcalismo, né? Portanto, aqui se opera uma crítica ao desenvolvimento sustentável e à sustentabilidade dentro dessa ótica da racionalidade capitalista. E assim seria bom recuperar esse conceito de sustentabilidade ligado às ciências ambientais, que subentende, em linhas gerais, essas condições de desenvolvimento voltado a assegurar a satisfação das necessidades da geração presente, sem comprometer as possibilidades da geração futura de realizar suas próprias necessidades e aspirações, um termo que teve sua origem ligada à primeira Conferência Mundial sobre o Homem e o Meio Ambiente, em 1972, né? Na nossa perspectiva, esse conceito hoje vem sendo utilizado de uma forma bastante vaga, incerta, tem se desgastado pelos próprios discursos mercadológicos e políticos que reproduzem, muitas vezes, as lógicas hegemônicas de produção, distribuição e consumo de produtos, sem romper o círculo vicioso que está na base dos problemas ambientais. Então, nesse sentido, o próprio conceito, né, de desenvolvimento sustentável, desenvolvido a partir de 1987 com maior clareza no relatório de Brundtland, e ali colocado, né, como um paradigma de desenvolvimento na Conferência das Nações Unidas sobre Meio Ambiente e Desenvolvimento, ocorrida no Rio de Janeiro, em 1992, a Rio 92, entendendo, né, compreendendo um quadro amplo dos aspectos interligados, né, aspectos ambientais, econômicos e sociais, tendo em vista assegurar esse desenvolvimento social equânime, sem comprometer o futuro equilíbrio ambiental. É importante notar que essas discussões que perpassam anos 70, anos 90 e desembocam nas discussões da COP26, no âmbito das Nações Unidas, elas acabam reafirmando, né, essa lógica dominante. E aqui, nesse caso, a gente observa, né, que a desaceleração do crescimento econômico não está entre as metas recomendadas, ao contrário, ali nos anos 90, principalmente na Rio 92, o crescimento econômico, né, o combate à pobreza, ao subdesenvolvimento, seria alcançado, segundo essa compreensão, somente pelo incentivo da nova era de crescimento, na qual os países desenvolvidos desempenhariam um papel relevante, ou seja, essa postura de desenvolvimento a qualquer custo foi um dos principais questionamentos feitos pelos críticos àquele documento. Desde o relatório, né, de Brundtland até a Agenda 2030 para o Desenvolvimento Sustentável, pouco se avançou na realização dessas metas, né? Transformar o nosso mundo é o título do documento desse trabalho preparatório da Conferência Mundial do Desenvolvimento Sustentável, Rio+20, né? Então, no âmbito da Agenda 2030 é que se estabeleceram, né, esses objetivos de desenvolvimento sustentáveis, entre os quais esse 11º, né, que apresenta metas, né, para essas cidades ambientalmente sustentáveis, né? O que entendemos enquanto grupo é que essas metas têm se mostrado fictícias, especialmente pelo fato de não ter enfrentado o debate da redução da produção, da distribuição e consumo das mercadorias, nem tampouco as desigualdades na distribuição das riquezas. E no que se refere, então, à ODS, a 11ª, né, que propõe tornar cidades mais inclusivas, seguras, resilientes, sustentáveis, uma questão é subjacente, né? Ela é colocada pelos urbanistas, que chamam de crise urbana, essa crise concomitante com a crise civilizatória aqui mencionada. No dizer, então, dos urbanistas, essa crise urbana está vinculada a essa acelerada urbanização, que vem se mostrando como um processo irreversível de deslocamento da população das áreas rurais para as áreas urbanas, desde a segunda metade do século XX, um fenômeno que é acompanhado pela intensificação do espraiamento das cidades, associado à formação de regiões metropolitanas, em que a ocupação extensiva do território dá-se pela aglomeração de um núcleo urbano densamente povoado e de municípios vizinhos, o que tende a aumentar a complexidade do planejamento e da gestão do território, exigindo um acúmulo de esforços e recursos para assegurar a qualidade de vida dessas populações, né? Em geral, em situação de vulnerabilidade social, né? O que temos visto é que esses esforços e esses recursos não têm sido suficientes, né? Portanto, é inegável que essa dinâmica de crescimento concorre de modo significativo para o agravamento dos problemas ambientais, pois tem contribuído para acentuar os males ligados ao consumo de energia, ao abastecimento de água e esgoto, a poluição atmosférica e sonora, a gestão de resíduos sólidos, só para mencionar aqui algumas das dificuldades mais prementes que afetam especialmente os grandes centros urbanos. Voltando à crise civilizatória e articulando essa crise civilizatória a uma visão de ecossocialismo, uma noção, uma compreensão de ecossocialismo, uma questão central que aqui se coloca é, mais uma vez, reforçando as críticas, né, as noções de desenvolvimento e progresso tão enfatizada pela racionalidade capitalista, colocando uma questão, então, central, que seria reconhecer que a falha fatal do capitalismo verde está no conflito entre a micro-racionalidade do mercado capitalista, com seu cálculo de curto prazo, de lucros e perdas, e a macro-realidade da ação coletiva pelo bem comum. Quer dizer, a lógica cega do mercado resiste a uma rápida transformação de energia, confirmando a dependência dos combustíveis fósseis em intrínseca contradição com a racionalidade ecológica. Então, é essa dimensão da contradição que a gente gostaria de enfatizar aqui. A questão, portanto, não é acusar os mal capitalistas, né, chamá-los de ecocidas, em oposição aos bons capitalistas, os verdes, mas a contradição está no próprio sistema enraizado numa impiedosa competição e numa corrida pelo lucro de curto prazo, que destrói o equilíbrio da natureza. O desafio ambiental, portanto, seria construir um sistema alternativo que reflita o bem comum em seu DNA institucional. Esse seria, então, o maior desafio socialista, segundo Michel Lovy, um autor ao qual a gente vai recorrer mais adiante para falar de ecossocialismo. Então, relacionando, né, essa condição da contradição da lógica capitalista como um todo, é preciso também reforçar as relações sinérgicas e sistêmicas entre as dimensões ambientais, econômicas e sociais. E, nesse sentido, é que a gente propõe também remeter aqui à concepção da economia solidária, já tão comentada e bem elucidada pelo professor Matthew Slaats, aqui, antes de mim, né? Recorrendo ao pensamento de Paul Singer, que lá nos anos 1970, né, coordena e lidera esse movimento que surge no Brasil, mas que se expande pelo mundo, né, inicialmente para combater a miséria e o desemprego gerados pela crise do petróleo, ali na década de 1970, mas que se transformou num modelo de desenvolvimento e de promoção não só da inclusão social, como pôde se tornar uma alternativa ao individualismo competitivo das sociedades capitalistas. Então, a gente está falando aqui de uma visão que se contrapõe e pretende substituir a competição pela cooperação, a heterogestão e uma gestão vertical e assimétrica por uma autogestão mais horizontal, e como um processo que, ainda que se organize, né, nos moldes de uma produção intersticial, né, ou seja, uma produção em núcleos, muitas vezes, de microescala, né, à margem dos grandes formas, né, de produção capitalista, mostram-se como respostas muito válidas para as crises, para o desemprego e para a exclusão social. Então, aponta para diferentes padrões de consumo, um consumo solidário, para a seleção de produtos, processos artesanais, para a recuperação de processos tradicionais também, muito ligados a uma ótica, por exemplo, da agricultura familiar e orgânica, a criação das hortas urbanas, né? E esses processos, eles são muito férteis em organizações de incubadoras, né, nos projetos de extensão, em que há colaboração entre a universidade e as comunidades periféricas. Esses processos garantem, asseguram essas práticas, né, tradicionais de solidariedade que se transformam em importantes instrumentos de emancipação. E articulada essa defesa da economia solidária é que a gente coloca essa perspectiva do comum como alternativa, né? E se a ideia do comum e do comum urbano nasce invocada por movimentos, por ativistas, por pesquisadores, para reivindicar e proteger contra privatizações, bens, recursos e espaços urbanos, que poderiam ser mais amplamente compartilhados entre os habitantes, nossas discussões tendem a avançar com base na discussão dos comuns urbanos, sobretudo como articulações entre conceitos e experimentações, entre princípios e estratégias, né, em práticas, experiências, né, concretas no território, pensando que o comum, nessas nossas discussões mais recentes, não são exatamente coisas, recursos, bens, mas corresponderiam precisamente a esse tecido orgânico de estruturas e processos sociais, esses processos de afirmação radical da alteridade, da possibilidade de criação de uma existência livre das opressões geradas pela exploração do trabalho, pela acumulação e concentração do capital, da propriedade privada, né, dessa condição binária Estado-mercado. O comum invoca, portanto, um futuro não capitalista, né, para além dessa antinomia moderna, Estado versus mercado, vai na direção de um conjunto de práticas e alternativas mais autônomas e coletivas de produção e reprodução social. Por isso que a gente diz que aponta para experiências de autogestão por parte de comunidades, para a produção do espaço gestada na vida cotidiana, baseada nessas relações e nas práticas de cooperação, de apropriação coletiva, de uso e autogestão, que vão convergir para a realização do direito à cidade, né? Para além de uma dicotomia entre o público e o privado. O comum, então, nessas nossas discussões mais recentes, está para além do espaço. A própria comunidade, tampouco é o pressuposto, né? O que se diz, o que dizemos em nossas leituras e discussões, né? É que o comum é justamente construído durante o processo. É esse processo contínuo que se dá do fazer comum pelos comuneiros como uma construção coletiva e permanente, né? Portanto, a territorialidade é central para o debate sobre os comuns, né? Essas discussões estão assentadas, né, em teorias de outros campos epistemológicos, da filosofia política, da geografia urbana, do direito urbano, né? Então, o urbanismo em diálogo com a geografia urbana tem avançado muito nas discussões dos comuns urbanos, portanto, a gente está falando de um arcabouço teórico e analítico que, se em origem estava pautado nas experiências do âmbito rural, hoje se debruça por essa conexão, né, entre homem-natureza, ambiente rural e urbano, e nessa sinergia, né, entre os âmbitos econômico, social e ambiental. Nosso grupo, então, se dedica à observação dos fenômenos urbanos para debater essa base teórica. E o comum é, então, essa produção, a gente pode dizer, de formas de vidas associativas, né? Tem como estratégia fundamental as estratégias de sobrevivência, as relações informais de compartilhamento, os circuitos expansivos de atividade não mercadológica, né? E, portanto, a construção do comum é uma agência coletiva e estabelece os princípios estruturadores da vida social. Esses princípios, a gente pode apontar 3 principais: da corresponsabilidade, da coobrigação política e do co-design, né? Como essa possibilidade de tecer essa construção e esse projeto, esse desenho urbano de modo participativo. O que faz ou torna o comum um processo, né, de construção coletiva é justamente a atividade prática, é esse exercício do comum, fazer comum pelos comuneiros, né, como uma produção coletiva de regramentos que se baseiam na autogestão. Não é assim, nada é comum em si ou por natureza, o comum é essa construção coletiva. Por isso que a ideia, né, que o grupo construiu ao longo das suas discussões, debates, é essa ideia do sujeito político coletivo, né? O comum aponta, portanto, para a formação de um corpo coletivo ou um sujeito político coletivo, né? E nessas discussões mais recentes é que a gente tem articulado as discussões dos comuns urbanos ao debate sobre o ecossocialismo, enquanto uma transição agroecológica para as cidades, tendo o cooperativismo e o associativismo como formas de gestão compartilhada, assim como propõe Michel Lovy, né? É com base no pensamento de Michel Lovy que a gente fala de uma transição agroecológica que concilia áreas rurais e urbanas, campo e cidade, né? Pensando que que há uma interligação, né, inevitável entre essas relações. Pensando que, por exemplo, a gestão das águas exerce seu impacto no meio urbano, que as questões da produção e do agronegócio interferem numa questão da insegurança alimentar, né? Então, são questões que estão integradas à produção da cidade. É Lovy quem fala que essa ameaça profunda e sistêmica torna necessário operar uma transformação também profunda e sistêmica, uma grande transição, né, como defesa de políticas fundadas em critérios não monetários, em necessidades sociais, num bem-estar dos grupos, né, minoritários, dos grupos sociais também em situação vulnerável e no equilíbrio ecológico. É nesse sentido que propõe uma crítica também, né, como dizíamos antes, a ecologia do mercado mainstream, né, que não desafia o sistema capitalista, como também uma crítica ao socialismo produtivista, que ignora os limites naturais. Então, essa perspectiva do planejamento democrático ecológico, segundo essa perspectiva, a própria sociedade, não uma pequena oligarquia de donos, né, de propriedade ou dos meios de produção, nem tampouco uma elite de tecnoburocratas, decidiria democraticamente quais as linhas produtivas a serem privilegiadas e como esses recursos gerados por as linhas produtivas seriam investidos em educação, saúde e cultura. Né? Esse planejamento focado, então, em decisões econômicas de larga escala, tendo em vista o pleno emprego, a redução da jornada de trabalho, a autogestão das unidades produtivas e o aumento do tempo livre, na contraposição a essa lógica, né, do consumo exacerbado, da produção em larga escala, da competição e do lucro. Então, desouvir a grande transição do progresso destrutivo capitalista para essa condição do ecossocialismo corresponde a um processo histórico, uma permanente transformação revolucionária da sociedade, da cultura e da mentalidade. E é dessa maneira que a gente integra, entrelaça a ideia de comum, que também é bastante utópica, né? Mas que é exercitada, experimentada no cotidiano, na dinâmica do cotidiano, né? Das comunidades periféricas, principalmente, a essa visão de ecossocialismo, e entrelaça ainda, para finalizar, já estou fechando, o pensamento de Lovi ao de um outro pensador, Arthur Escobar, que coloca a possibilidade de construção de um desenho para a transição de discursos e práticas, de modelos epistêmicos, né, e políticos, que mirem o alcance ecológico profundo, em consonância com a concepção da ecologia social, que se associa não apenas com a defesa de recursos e territórios, mas também de suas formas de ser no mundo, de projetos de vida coletivos e alternativos. E é nessa perspectiva que, por fim, a gente coloca como ponto central dessa compreensão de ecossocialismo, que é a compreensão do grupo que aqui represento, o qual debater sobre a possibilidade, ou seja, pela impossibilidade de se pensar uma ideia de socialismo sem pensar a relação homem-natureza. E aqui não se trata de separar rural e urbano, ainda que a lente do grupo se detenha na investigação dos comuns urbanos, né? Porque também temos a consciência de que não se trata de uma escolha individual, tampouco. É, sobretudo, uma questão coletiva. E aqui eu encerro minha fala, agradecendo mais uma vez o convite ao grupo qual de participar desta tarde, desse encontro. Obrigada.
Muito obrigado, professora Eneida Almeida, por essa interessantíssima exposição. Você traz aqui nessa parte final todo um conjunto de referências importantíssimas, tanto do ponto de vista de alguns autores, que são muito importantes como contribuintes para se entender os complexos estabelecidos pelas relações entre homem e a natureza, especialmente nas cidades. E, claro, deixa claro uma tomada de posição por essa vertente do ecossocialismo, que muito presente pós os anos 1970, tem nos desafiado todos ao debate entre a perspectiva capitalista e sua produção e reprodução de espaço e sociedade, em uma perspectiva de uma via de integração desse mesmo desenvolvimento com questões ecológicas e de justiça social, que nos colocam todos em desafio. I don't know if Matthew follow us because I'm talking in English, in Portuguese, but I saw that we have a legend in my screen. There is a legend in English. I don't know if you see, Matthew. No, I don't. I don't. I think you don't. You don't see. But there is no problem. I will pass to English because Eneida did her presentation in Portuguese. It was very good. And I thought it was a legend when she was talking. She was presenting. But now, to me, there is a legend. But I don't know if to you is the same. Maybe not. But there is no problem. I was talking that Eneida, at the end of the three presentations, talked about interesting conceptions, theories related to the basis to analyze the interaction between man and nature in notably cities. And of course, she proposed as her choice the way to ecosocialism and social justice to analyze these problems. And at the end, she talked just a little about this possibility concerning post-modernity or, as we know, decolonization of approach of social life in Latin America or America. So at the end of the three conceptions or three presentations, we could establish a debate here. Just to complete, of course, the speeches, I think, or in my mind, there is no opposition between the perspective presented. In my mind, what we have was the complementation of conceptual, political, social, cultural, and environmental aspects proposed by every one of you. At the same time, we had very interesting examples concerning Latin American cities as Santiago, the center of proposition of Mr. Romero, and also São Paulo, talked by, notably by Eneida. But the conflicts in the United States is posing in question that question based on the solidarity economy, that we saw the conflicts in the city. But to the future, of course, we talked about the past, the present. We talk about the conflict that we follow by news, we follow by books, we follow by studies. But what the challenge? What could you have to what could you talk to the challenge or concern challenge to the future, to the life in the cities? Why I ask this, or why I would like to hear you about this? We live a very bad moment in the social history. I think a deep pessimism, not only because the extreme right side political is in place in every part of the world, and I am against that. I suppose with your speech you are also. But at the same time, with political aspects, there is a culture, in other words, very, very, very attached to technologies, consumption. Forced, of course, by a system that you three talked about. It means capitalism in the global level nowadays. But I think many youngs will hear us. And I try, if it's not easy, as I can, talk something in the way of hope to the future, hope to the youngs, hope to the earth. I think we can also do in this way. Of course, it's not to forget the problem. It's not to put beside us the problem. It's not that. But we must find, I think, in a way, or think or reflection about the future. The future belongs to the people that will come. Children, youngs, us, a part of us, of course. But the future, as I'm talking, in this passage as we're living now, the very deep pessimism that we're living now, we must find lights, possibilities, hope. I would like to hear you about these questions in your experience of life in cities, just to say a word to hope to the person that will hear us. In this way, if Hugo can talk as the first speaker, I would like to hear him. Hugo?
Yes, Francisco.
Hugo, if you permit me, I will add just one question that we received from someone that who is with us. She or he send us one question. I will just put with the mind, and you can do the procedure as you want. The question is, where is the balance between social economic growth and sustainability? Latin America mainly, where property has higher stats. So just to add in my question, and Hugo, you can do your reflection, and Matthew also, and Eneida too. So pass Hugo the word, please.
Well, one point that I would like to relate with the presentation of Eneida and Matthew is that in the case of Chile, probably you know that we have been following the more strictly neoliberalism, for the last 40 years, And of course, we were a sort of war experiment, and the first country in the world where the Chicago boys, or I mean the Chicago economists, came to Chile, prepared the government program at the same time that we were trying to move to the socialism, under the presidency of Allende, at the same time, and of course, as a consequence of the revolution that the socialist government means, the United States in particular was strongly involved in the defeat of President Allende, like just exactly like a way to stop this movement to the socialism, And the dictatorship that was the consequence of this political pendulum, was terrible for us. And the dictatorship during the near 20 years, they were imposing in all the aspects of the life. Education, health, the city, the urban space, the national resources, everything was transformed from public goods in private goods. And we have lived the most complete process of privatization and commodification that we have never felt before. For instance, water. Since 1981, water is a privatized resource in Chile. All the water along the country. And then you can buy or sell or rent water rights in the market. No? And of course, as a consequence of this procedure, many rich people is today rich because they own water rights. No, they don't have the water physically. They have the right to use the water. No, and it's incredible. No, many rivers are today they have more water rights than the water they have. No, so I mean the speculation related with the creation of goods, even artificial goods like water, no, because they need to create markets, no, in everything. No, of course, land is another important measure, but also forests. Everything was commodified. No, and what is amazing, air, because yes, all of us understand that the air it must be free goods, no, because we cannot buy air to breathe. No, it's funny, no, but air is commodified, especially in the city. No? If you would like to live in Chile, as I mentioned, as I presented to you, if you would like to live in a place where they're cleaner, you have to pay for the column of air. The air column is in the market, no? And of course, the neighbor, the best neighborhoods in terms of air quality are the most expensive ones. No? And on the contrary, if you don't have enough money, you have to go to live in a place, you know, where air is polluted, or where natural hazards like floods, no, or are the most common ecological feature, or the lack of vegetation, or the lack of ventilation. No? So Chile has applied during 40 years the most strictly neoliberal system, and the democracy, I think, went or became a sort of perfection in the system. No? They put together some democracy on one side, but keeping the most important consideration definition of the market economy. And the interesting point is then to ask, how has been the result of the very long experiments? No? And I show you the results. Millions of people demonstrating in the streets, no, against this model. Then I think that it's interesting. We are not only speculating about this. No, we have already lived 40 years under this strict model, and we can observe everywhere the results. No? And the results are absolutely contrary to the principles and doctrines and, you know, even propaganda that accompany all the implementation of this system in Chile. No? Remember, one of the, for instance, in terms of education, all the education was privatized in Chile. Even the public university, we have been living more than 30 years in the privatized public university, no? Where the students have to pay, no? Like in USA, no? They have to pay to go to the university. And of course, you can imagine immediately what is the social result. No? Only the rich people came to the university. So the social segregation and social exclusion is the result. Then we have to think something different. No, yeah, it's a matter of we cannot stay at this step. We have to move. We have to change. But it's not easy. It's not easy because, of course, the power is much more concentrated. The economic power, the political power, the military power are concentrated. No? Then it's very difficult to imagine that they are going to accept some changes without a strong resistance from the power. But however, there is another emerging power, of course, the social power, no? And it's still becoming more and more important, like you see in the slides. No? And as a result of this social movement, it's not possible for the capitalism to survive. No? Then they create social reforms to try to introduce a sort of possibility of some sort of solidarity or new terms, no, in the political issue to try to ensure that the capitalism is going to be able to survive. And of course, the green ecology, the green is everywhere now. No, green production, green mining, green cities, everything is green. For who? And for what? No? Then it's clear that everything is focused now in a new definition, which has to do a lot with your interventions. I mean, new values, first of all, social values, solidarity, and very interesting, also some sort of recovering of the old traditional values of our indigenous people. No? The indigenous people values like solidarity, complementarity, national respectability, no, etc., no, are now in the social discussion. And the second point, which is also very interesting, and I have already mentioned, is that we have to territorialize our process. No? The society is complaining. They said they require a new definition, a new geographical definition of the space. No? According to the nation, of course, based on nation, but also in some way interpreting and incorporating all the social values at local level. No? So I guess that probably this is a new opportunity to propose, no, some sort of communality and some sort of new space in the city, recognizing exactly the difference that we have to take into consideration. It's a more diversified city anyway, with common goods. We have to recover common goods. Water, air, climate should be again common goods. There is no way to survive in this system. However, what is the main problem? We are going to have election in 2 weeks. And the probability that these ideas of solidarity and socialism and ecology have today almost the same probability than the contrary ideas. How is it possible? No? What I try to say is that how the values of neoliberalism have already penetrated into society very strongly. Yep. No? For instance, social system, social security system in Chile is completely privatized. Each of us has a personal and individual account. Of course, if your life work has been irregular, with a period of unemployment, for instance, without the money for the aposentadoria, for the jubilation, for the retirement, you don't have money, enough money. So for sure you're going to be poor. But in any case, we have the idea that this money is individual money. It's not social money. And what is the result of this? That now, because the economical crisis, it was allowed for everybody to take away the money for retirement. 50% of the population, the poorer population of the country, has taken away their money because they consider that this money is individual money. No? So you can imagine the difficulty that we are going to have to recover a common retirement fund for everybody. No? So this penetration of the ideology, neoliberal ideology, no, in private property of water, of air, of vegetation, of recreation, of everything, is a difficult issue. Very difficult. So I think that this is a big challenge, not only for Chile, for Latin America, because I believe that during the last decades, the advancement of neoliberalism in all the aspects of the life, quotidian life, is very strong. No? So this is how we are going to do it, and how we are going. In some way, the support that the extreme rights candidate has today is related with this topic. No? He's always talking. We are going to protect private property. We are going to protect all the individual rights. We are going to protect private education. We are going to protect private health. This is the message. And he won the first round. He won with this message. No? And we are afraid about the second round. No? So I think that there is a big fight, particularly from the intellectual point of view. No? How we are going to reconvince and to our societies in the importance of common good, solidarity, and other values which are absolutely necessary to a real development. I think that this is, for us in Chile at least, is a very critical point today.
Thank you very much. It's clear. Tomorrow we discussed about the problems in Latin America cities. It's impossible to talk about that or reflection about these problems without political accent. Impossible. Absolutely. There is no solution. There is no way without great or superstructure of society. It must be changed. Without this, we can't go in direction in a future, in a common good to everybody. So thank you very much for appreciation. But now we will hear about these questions from Slaats. Matthew, please.
First, Professor Romero, I wanted to say, I actually want to apologize for my university. My university was actually a primary player in those neoliberal policies. And so a lot of what I stand for as a student and teaching courses is trying to find ways to infect what is the neoliberalization of the university here to impact. Those ideas were taken to Chile to test them, right? And now they've come back into the US and are being deployed in similar ways. And we're seeing the similar effects of the privatization of everything. My hope is that where I find hope is in sitting down with people and actually listening to their stories, and then from that recognizing their agency in the work that they have. I think, like in the U.S. context specifically, I think we take for granted the system that we work within. We have two political parties. They battle it out for political power over and over and over again. We're going to continue to see this metronome of political power keep moving back and forth, because neither of them are actually really interested in doing anything. It's really just about holding power collectively. And we don't have the grassroots muscle, the infrastructure to actually to make major change to impact them. I'll say in the last election that took place here at the state level, we had a third-party candidate who it showed that the possibility that someone could be out there could produce different ideas and challenge those. I mean, either the left or the right in the U.S. On the policies that they were taking place. So, but it's a small gesture, and I come back to this, this realization too that people don't understand, again, they don't understand their power or their agency. And it's only in these times of crisis that people where they're forced to take action, that they start to realize that they start to see it. And so it goes back to this comment I made about the abstraction of the economy. It's also the abstraction of the environment. It's the abstraction of just life, that marketization of that. The abstraction allows the marketization of everything, because people start to lose their relationship between the reality of their lives and the way they use materiality. It's too easy to go on the computer and order your groceries from Amazon, when you could just drive down the street and probably go pick up groceries at a locally sourced like farmer's market or whatnot. I personally believe, and I think we're starting to see it, is that there's just this questioning. Don't know if you have these programs in the United States. We have this program called Alcoholics Anonymous, where people try to overcome. And the first step in that process is actually admitting you're an alcoholic. And what a lot of the things that I see is people starting to be like, they sort of say, yes, I'm a capitalist. And to see them just even admit that, and then that opens up a conversation. You're like, well, do you really understand what that means? It means disinvestment, it means disenfranchisement, it means extraction, it means domination. And so it means wealth going to individuals versus being invested in our communities and to make them resilient and whole. I mean, it goes back to my point about crisis. Is like I'm not happy that crisis continues to be the mechanism through which we actually try to make change happen. We have to go through trauma. We have to be in pain to actually make change happen. And so, again, there's questions of like, how do we start to like build that consciousness that a different world can happen in people's everyday lives, because I think people just want to live. They just want to have a daily life. So I think it takes a lot of intentionality in terms of the work that's going on in the U.S. I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement, is what it does. It has opened up a conversation about what it means to be a Black person in the United States. And now it's getting reinforced through various authors writing books, and they're starting to build, and not that it wasn't there, but it's starting to build an opening for a conversation that I hope leads to some change, but I'm also not confident in the ability. I mean, we have to recognize, if we read like Cedric Robinson's book, racial capitalism is a 400-year or more project. It's not going to go away in an evening, and I don't really believe that we're actually know what the future is. I think things like ecosocialism, I think things like solidarity economies. There's a massive amount of initiatives that are going on in the U.S., like just transition, new economies. There's a lot of different terminologies that are getting used. Those are pointing in the right direction, and we'll see where that takes us. I think the hard work of just trying to do that kind of grassroots organizing. That's why, as an academic, I value not only studying the roots and the importance of that knowledge, but then the knowledge that's rooted in my community. And how do we pair those knowledges together to then to then incubate ideas and incubate practices that can open up those conversations. Yeah, I don't have a good answer, I don't feel. But I guess going back to, Francisco, your early question of where do I find hope? I mean, I find hope right now in the opening conversation of people's interest, like, no, does this really have to be the way it is? That's my daughter reading, like me being able to expose her to different authors and opening up those conversations. It's a recognition that children need to be at the table when decisions are being made about their lives. They're not kind of empty vessels of knowledge. They have experiences that can help inform policy. It's creating space for the communities that are the most impacted to be at the forefront of decision making. I mean, I'm working with some public housing residents here in Virginia who have created a new paradigm for public housing in the US, the one that is actually seeing public housing invested in and not extracted from. We need to find ways to make those stories more told to a broader audience. And again, coming from a kind of an artistic kind of storytelling background, I do feel the strength of telling those narratives, either verbally or through the internet or something like that, allows people to start to see that those possibilities are real. And I've seen that in some of the training that we've done. We've created these examples of what they call beautiful solutions, like post-capitalist possibilities. And when people start to see those, they start to say, "Oh, this is possible. I don't have to accept what is given to me. I can think about those things." But then we have to build the infrastructure and the ability for people to make that, to actually transition from that effective emotional response to that material reality. And I think a lot of what the work that I see us doing is like, how do we build the infrastructures, the power bases, the ability to collaborate, the solidarity, the equity? How do we start to like build the infrastructure to then move us to those futures?
Yes, very interesting. Yeah, the section yesterday we received 2 colleagues from UN Habitat and another from IPEA. It was very interesting because the 2 ladies presented us many actions in Latin America, notably in Brazil, concerning, for example, the actions that inclusion. That's action inclusion concerning, for example, how could we, as persons, as researchers that develops many aspects, many analyses, could work with people and in a certain way, showing them how could be feel included or participate in the reality. Something very interesting, but the communities, very, for example, Islams, very communities in this social discrimination, like, for example, ethnic problems or social classes. It was very interesting, but as that presentation yesterday, this presentation, as yours, I think when I talk about hope, it's passed from the great mind or great possibilities as we are talking today, and practices, of course, but something very interesting, it's as I saw yesterday, I repaired yesterday, is persons must feel that they belong to the reality, belong to the process, be part of, and not be far, waiting the state to resolve the problems, because the state is the highest structure. We must think the reality inside it. Thank you very much, Matthew. And now I think Eneida could also contribute with us to this very exciting debate. Eneida, please.
Bem, o que eu gostaria de colocar, né, como fechamento, essas questões que foram aqui apresentadas, eu acho que é diante dessa conjuntura complexa atual, né, em que os colapsos econômicos e ambientais são cada vez mais evidentes, torna-se cada vez mais urgente também contribuir para a construção de um pacto ecológico inclusivo, o que requer um novo modelo de planejamento e gestão das cidades, de maneira a propiciar um desenvolvimento que preveja, né, que coloque a condição de projetos participativos de transformação urbana e social, tanto em áreas centrais quanto periferias, e aqui eu me refiro às grandes cidades, né, as metrópoles brasileiras, como São Paulo, onde vivemos, as áreas centrais e periféricas, mas também as áreas centrais do mundo desenvolvido e as periferias do mundo global. Não dá para pensar nessa cisão ou modelos que não envolva essa inclusão seja ampla, de fato, né? E, nesse sentido, é que se mostra essencial fortalecer o contato com pessoas de diferentes conhecimentos em torno de problemas comuns e situados, muitas vezes em microescala, né? Em comunidades periféricas, em situação de vulnerabilidade social, tendo em vista essa formulação de proposições que contribuam, de alguma forma, para a construção de alternativas a esse projeto globalizante que em substância, está falido, né? Apresenta graves distorções. Então, é a partir desse prisma que a gente coloca o grupo ao qual eu pertenço, faço parte, o qual, né, os comuns urbanos América Latina, essa perspectiva, então, dos comuns urbanos como possibilidade de radicalizar os modos de participação democrática, que regularmente são viabilizados pelos organismos representativos, mas que invariavelmente são capturados pelas forças conservadoras, e aqui a gente vive um momento complexo e difícil no Brasil justamente por conta disso, né? E que operam para a manutenção do status quo ou ainda numa condição mais adversa e mais perversa de desmonte, de conquistas que já tinham sido alcançadas, né? Então, é com esses pressupostos que retomamos a noção do comum enquanto exercício de práticas horizontais, autogeridas, de colaboração mobilizada por pessoas que se organizam a partir de interesses coletivos, né, com base em pautas de resistência, não só às lógicas hegemônicas, excludentes, mas também intenção e debate com os agentes do Estado e suas políticas públicas. É nesse sentido que eu gostaria de contribuir para essa fala final, sempre com as desculpas por falar em português.
Não há absolutamente motivo nenhum para se desculpar. Sua apresentação foi excelente, suas contribuições maravilhosas, coroaram toda a reflexão desenvolvida pelo professor Hugo, pelo professor Mátio. Vou passar ao inglês para atender a maioria, mas muitíssimo obrigado. I was talking, Matthew, to thank Eneida because she apologized for didn't speak in English, but I told her it's not a problem. It's not a problem. She exposed very, very interesting point of view concerning theoretical or conceptual aspects that related completely with your speech and the speech of Hugo. So I thank you all very much. It was a very, very nice and exciting afternoon in debates. I thank you by my university Federal University of Paraná, that organized this international conference. Thank you again to be with us. I wish you a very, very nice evening. So thank you very much. We will send you a certificate to your participation as the finish of conference. Thank you very much, and let's fight for the common good to our planet. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.